He whispered, "She's just after Eurocash at the funeral." But my comeback exposed his lie and revealed the greed he hid behind his fake grief, silencing everyone inside the chapel. "My name is Megan Harris, I'm 29, and at my father's funeral in the small town of Asheville, North Carolina, I learned that grief isn't always the sharpest pain. Sometimes it's family." The moment I stepped into the chapel, conversations died mid-sentence. Someone muttered loudly enough to sting. "Of course she showed up. Now she wants money." But the worst was my stepbrother, Dylan, 33. He leaned toward our uncle and whispered, deliberately careless, "She's only here for the cash. Dad cut her out of the will anyway." A ripple of laughter moved through the first rows. Laughter, even with the coffin right there in front of the altar. Aunt Linda turned toward me with that syrupy sweet cruelty she'd perfected. "Megan, honey, you could have worn something more respectable? Or could you not afford a proper dress?" I stood there like some kid being mocked in a school hallway while Dylan drifted between guests, pretending to be the grieving son. Dabbing his eyes, sighing dramatically, bragging about how much stress Dad's care had put on him. I knew he was lying, but I didn't yet understand just how deep that lie went. My father, Robert Harris, wasn't a wealthy man, but he built something solid with his own hands. A small construction company that kept half of Asheville standing. He wasn't the type who threw around money, but he believed in hard work, in keeping your word, in showing up for the people you loved. That was the man who raised me. When I left for college in Chicago to study design, everyone acted proud. Dad hugged me so tightly I could feel the calluses on his palms. My stepbrother, Dylan, clapped me on the back with a smile that, even then, felt a little too polished. I thought he was just trying to be supportive. Looking back, that was the moment he saw his opportunity. While I was busy learning software, deadlines, and client briefs, Dylan slid into the space I'd left behind. Quietly, strategically, like a man slipping into someone else's coat and hoping nobody noticed it wasn't his. He started answering Dad's phone on his behalf, sorting mail, handling appointments, helping around the business. Harmless things, helpful things, things I thought any responsible son would do. But over time, the helpfulness twisted into something else. I learned later that Dylan filtered every message that came through the office. He decided which clients weren't worth Dad's time, which friends were too dramatic, and which family members only called when they needed something. Apparently, I fell neatly into that last category. I used to send my dad postcards from Chicago, little sketches of the lakefront, photos of my projects, birthday cards with dumb jokes. He loved them, or he would have if he'd ever seen them. Dylan intercepted everything, deleted emails, ignored texts, threw away letters. I found out the truth years later when a box of my old postcards turned up in the garage, still rubber-banded together, never opened. Every time I visited home, something felt off. I'd text Dad that I was arriving Friday night, then show up and find him confused, asking why I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Dylan would shrug, wide-eyed, "Oh, Meg, I must have mixed up the days." Or, "Oops, my phone died." Or my personal favorite, "I thought you meant next weekend." Family dinners were rescheduled without telling me. Holidays were suddenly more convenient for everyone else if they met without me. I would walk through the door and feel like an unexpected guest at my own childhood home. Polite smiles, stiff hugs, conversations that paused the moment I entered the room. It wasn't open hostility. It was worse. It was erasure. One Thanksgiving, I decided to come home unannounced. No group chat, no warning, no window for Dylan to accidentally forget to mention my plans. Dad was sitting alone in the living room, eating reheated turkey on a TV tray. "Megan?" he said, blinking as if I were a ghost. "Dylan told me you didn't want to come home anymore, that you'd moved on, that you were too busy with your new life." He said it gently, without accusation. Dad always assumed the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. That was the first time I felt something cold spread under my ribs, the realization that Dylan wasn't just incompetent or forgetful. This was deliberate, careful, slow, campaign. And I had been too trusting, too far away, too preoccupied with my own life to notice I was being written out of my own family narrative. I tried to fix it. God knows I tried. For the next 4 years, I called more often, visited more, showed up on birthdays and random Tuesdays. I forced my way into conversations Dylan tried to steer around me. I made sure Dad heard my voice, not Dylan's filtered version of it. But damage, once done slowly enough, starts to feel like truth. By the time Dad got sick, the illness Dylan described to everyone as sudden, though it wasn't. He had already been fed years of carefully curated stories. Stories where I was too busy, too distant, too self-absorbed to care. Stories where Dylan was the dutiful son, the responsible one, the only one who stayed. And by the time Dad died, I think he believed some of them. Not because he wanted to, but because the lies were repeated so often they blended into his reality. The worst part? Dylan didn't do it out of love for Dad. He did it because he saw a future without me, a future with fewer people to share the inheritance. And I was still naive enough to think the story ended at the funeral. Didn't. That was just the opening act. Barely 20 minutes had passed in the chapel before Dylan launched into what can only be described as a performance. He planted himself beside the casket like an actor hitting his mark, one hand on the polished wood, the other clutching a damp tissue he kept dabbing his perfectly dry eyes with. Every few seconds he let out a dramatic sniff, the kind that demanded attention, the kind that said, "Look at me, I'm suffering more than anyone here." And people ate it up. They always did. He drifted from guest to guest, lowering his voice in that confidential, weary tone he used whenever he wanted moral credit. "I had to run the whole business alone these last years." I heard him sigh. "I paid for all Dad's medications myself. Megan didn't even call him on Christmas." Broke his heart. The words cut through the soft organ music like knives. And as each lie landed, I felt eyes shifting toward me. Curious, accusing, already convinced. By the time I reached the middle row, the weight of the room had settled around me like fog. That's when Mr. Johnson, my father's business partner, approached. He was a tall, dignified man, always polite, always fair. He'd known me since I was a child, but his face held something like disappointment. "Your brother told me you and Robert stopped speaking," he said quietly. "A shame. He always lit up when talking about you." I opened my mouth, finally ready to defend myself, to say no, that's not true. I really tried, but Dylan materialized between us like smoke. "Don't question her," he said, placing a hand on Mr. Johnson's shoulder. "She's going through a lot. She hoped Dad would leave her something. But, well, it is what it is." The way he said it, pitying, patronizing, it made me feel like a beggar who had shown up at a stranger's door, asking for scraps. People began whispering, not even trying to hide it. Later, near the table with coffee and bottled water, Dylan struck again. Louder this time, making sure half the chapel could hear. "Don't worry, Meg. Dad wasn't stupid. He didn't hand money out to strangers." A burst of laughter followed. Short, harsh, ugly. I stood there holding a flimsy plastic cup of coffee I no longer wanted, surrounded by people who had already chosen their version of the story. They didn't know me. They didn't want to. Dylan had given them a simpler narrative, the negligent daughter versus the noble son. And they applauded the villain because he wore the mask convincingly. At some point I stopped listening. Not because it hurt less, but because the humiliation became too large to fit in words. It existed like a physical pressure in my chest, pushing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. But then something happened, something small, almost invisible, that changed everything. The chapel doors opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. He walked with quiet purpose, glancing over the crowd as if searching for someone. When our eyes met, he nodded. It was my father's attorney, Mr. Reynolds. He approached Dylan first, offering condolences. Dylan puffed up immediately, probably expecting praise for his devotion. But Mr. Reynolds' gaze slid past him and landed on me. "Miss Harris," he said warmly, "we'll be reading your father's will tomorrow morning. Please make sure you're there." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Conversations stopped. Forks hovered in midair. Even Dylan seemed stunned. And then, like wolves catching the scent of blood, faces shifted around the chapel. Smirks, smug grins, looks of absolute certainty. They believed, without a shadow of doubt, that the will would confirm the story Dylan had fed them, that I would walk away with nothing, that I had come crawling back too late. Some of them already looked ready to celebrate. But while they whispered and mentally divided the inheritance, something entirely different formed in the back of my mind. A thought I didn't dare voice yet, because Mr. Reynolds hadn't looked at me with pity. He'd looked at me with expectation. And that was the first moment I realized something wasn't adding up. Not about Dad. Not about the will. And especially not about Dylan's frantic need to paint me as the outsider. The circus wasn't over. It was just intermission. The next morning, the conference room in Mr. Reynolds' law office felt like neutral territory for a war none of US had agreed to fight openly. The blinds were half drawn, letting in a thin stripe of winter sunlight that cut across the polished table like a knife. Everyone was there. The aunts with their judgmental stares, the cousins who had laughed at the funeral, and, of course, Dylan, who sat at the head of the table as if it were his rightful throne. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced across his stomach, radiating the smug calm of a man who believed the world was about to kneel at his feet. I took a seat at the far end, like some distant relative invited out of courtesy. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. As per Robert Harris's instructions, we'll begin by playing a video he recorded 2 months before his passing. The screen flickered, then my father appeared, thinner, older, but unmistakably him. The sight of his face hit me so hard I had to grip the sides of my chair. His voice, when it came, was steady but laced with the weariness of someone who'd carried too much for too long. "If you're watching this," he began, "I'm no longer here, and there are things I need to say before you hear what I've decided." No one breathed, not even Dylan. Dad continued, eyes focused directly into the camera. "I recently found something disturbing in Dylan's closet. A box filled with letters, postcards, and messages from Megan. All unopened. All undelivered." A ripple moved around the table. Someone gasped. Another cousin muttered, "Oh my God!" I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing Dad confirm it felt like having the ground shift under me. "I confronted Dylan," Dad said quietly. "He denied it, so I hired a private investigator." Dylan jerked upright. "What?" he spat, half rising from his chair. "Sit," Mr. Reynolds said sharply. Dad kept speaking. The investigator confirmed that for years, Dylan intercepted Megan's communications. He redirected calls, deleted emails, gave me the impression she didn't want anything to do with me. A choking silence filled the room. I heard someone swallow hard. Maybe Aunt Linda. Then Dad said the words that punched straight into my chest. "Megan, you didn't turn away from me. I turned away from you because of lies. I am sorry. I hadn't expected tears. But they came anyway, burning, heavy, impossible to hide." The whole room seemed to pull back, suddenly ashamed of every whisper from the day before. As for Dylan, he was chalk white. His jaw trembled with a rage he was trying and failing to contain. But Dad wasn't finished. "And now," he continued, voice hardening, "there is more that needs to be exposed." The video cut to a stack of documents on his desk. Financial reports, receipts, bank statements. "For the past 3 years," Dad said, "Dylan has been withdrawing money from the company accounts without authorization. He falsified reports. He took bribes to expedite construction permits. His actions risked not only the business but our family's reputation." The room erupted into horrified whispers. "What? That can't be true. Oh my God, Dylan." But I didn't look at the others. I looked at my brother. And for the first time in my life I saw fear in his eyes. Not guilt. Not shame. Fear. The kind that comes when a man realizes the story he's been directing is slipping out of his hands. Dad's voice returned, firm and resolute. "As a result, I have revised my will. Dylan will not inherit the company. He will receive $80,000, held in a monitored trust, to ensure he cannot harm the business further. Dylan shot to his feet. This is bullshit. He wasn't in his right mind. You must have. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds said again, colder this time. And finally, Dad said, his tone softening, my home, my savings, and 60% of the company will go to Megan. Not because she begged for it. Not because she asked for anything. But because she remained my daughter, even when I failed to remain her father. The screen went black. Silence crashed over the room. Not a polite silence. Not a respectful one. No. This was the stunned, suffocating kind that fills the air after a bomb detonates. Aunt Linda pressed a hand to her chest. Her cousin looked like he might faint. Someone dropped a pen. And Dylan looked like a man who'd been shot, but was still trying to pretend the wound was small. His lips curled into a broken half-smile. This isn't over, he whispered. I didn't respond, because for the first time in years, maybe ever, I wasn't the one who needed to defend myself. The truth had finally walked into the room and sat down at the table. And it wasn't taking Dylan's side. For a split second after the video ended, no one moved. The room felt frozen, like the air itself had turned to glass. Then Dylan snapped. He lunged toward Mr. Reynolds, knocking over his chair with a sharp crack. This is fake. All of it. You edited that. You manipulated him. Mr. Reynolds didn't even flinch. Sit down, Mr. Harris. But Dylan wasn't listening. He was shaking, panic mixed with fury, the kind of rage that comes only when a man realizes the facts can't be bullied. You think I'm going to let this stand? He shouted. He was sick. He didn't know what he was signing. This is fraud. Do you hear me? Fraud. Mr. Reynolds calmly tapped a key on his laptop. Very well, he said. Then let's continue. The screen lit up again. This time not with a video, but with recordings. Phone calls, emails, screenshots, financial statements, time-stamped logs of redirected messages, audio clips of conversations between Dylan and bribe-paying contractors. One by one, the lies unraveled. The more the evidence built, the smaller Dylan looked. His shoulders curled inward, his breath coming in fast, uneven bursts. Around the table, the family watched in a stunned, horrified silence. These were the same people who had snickered in the chapel, who had rolled their eyes at my presence, who had believed Dylan's version of me without question. Aunt Linda, the queen of snide remarks, was the first to turn pale. Her lips trembled, and she looked away when Dylan tried to meet her eyes. Uncle Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Oh God, he lied. He lied to us the whole time. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't even move. The truth was too heavy for triumph. Dylan, though, he spiraled. This is illegal, he screeched. You can't spy on me. You can't. I'll sue all of you. Megan, you think you won? You think this is yours? He pointed at me, shaking with something raw and feral. You don't deserve anything. You left. You abandoned Dad. You. That's enough. Mr. Reynolds cut in. His tone went from patient to icy. Mr. Harris, what you've just seen is only a small portion of the evidence your father provided. Before his passing, Robert filed a preliminary report with the district attorney regarding embezzlement and fraud. If you continue down this path, he paused, letting the meaning sink in. You will face criminal charges. The threat hit Dylan like a slap. His mouth snapped shut. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something far uglier. Fear. He backed away from the table, bumping into a cabinet. His eyes darted from Mr. Reynolds to the laptop to me, as if searching for a crack in the truth he could squeeze through. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Fine, he spat finally. Fine. Enjoy your petty inheritance. And with that, he stormed out, shoulder slamming the door so hard the glass vibrated. No one followed him. The door clicked shut, sealing the end of the role Dylan had loved so much. The perfect son, the heir, the martyr, the hero of his own lies. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel hostile. It felt empty, quiet, honest. Mr. Reynolds turned to me. "Megan," he said gently, "your father wanted you to know the truth. He regretted the distance. He made every effort to set things right." My throat tightened, not with joy, but with something quieter, sadder. Relief. Not victory. Not revenge. Just release. For the first time in a decade, I felt the weight lift from my chest. This heavy, invisible stone Dylan had placed there one lie at a time. But relief didn't erase reality. Because the final documents spread across the table painted a grim picture. The company Dad had built, the business Dylan claimed to carry alone, was almost collapsing. Permits delayed. Invoices unpaid. Clients threatening to terminate contracts. Suppliers refusing credit. Bank accounts dangerously low. Dad's voice echoed in my head. From the last line of his video, "Megan, the business will need help. You'll have to decide what to save." I looked at the mess Dylan had left behind. The numbers bleeding red. The signatures forged. The accounts hollowed out. And something settled inside me. Not fear. Not dread. Determination. Because truth wasn't the end of the story. It was only the first step. And now it was my turn to rebuild what he'd tried so hard to destroy. In the weeks that followed, life didn't snap into place with any dramatic flourish. There was no triumphant music, no cinematic moment of, everything is fixed now. What there always is after the ground settles, was work. Hard, unglamorous, necessary work. I stepped into the company only as a temporary measure, just like Dad had asked. Not because I wanted power or ownership or the spotlight Dylan had chased his entire life, but because someone needed to put out the fires he'd left burning. The first week, I walked through the office like a stranger in my own childhood home. People were wary, confused, waiting to see if I was another Harris coming to manipulate, to bark orders, to cut corners. But I didn't shout. I didn't posture. I listened. I sat down with the accountants, the project managers, the foremen, the interns. I asked them what was broken, and they told me, some quietly, some angrily, some with relief, as if finally someone had asked the question they'd been waiting years to answer. Then I acted. I dismissed 5 of Dylan's loyal men, the ones who had helped him warp the numbers, bury complaints, push dangerous shortcuts. 3 of them argued, 1 threatened to call his union, and 1 walked out without a word. Let them. The rot had to be removed before anything could stand again. Next, I reopened the books, all of them. Months of late-night spreadsheets. Stacks of unpaid invoices. Phone calls to vendors who'd given up hope. Meetings with clients who'd been lied to so convincingly they didn't know where the truth began anymore. Some conversations ended well. Some didn't. But at least they were honest. And slowly, painfully, things stabilized. 2 of the riskiest projects, the ones Dylan had rushed to secure bonuses, I shut down entirely. It hurt, cost money, saved lives. One afternoon, while digging through the storage room in Dad's house, I found a cardboard box tucked behind an old coat rack. It was covered in dust, sealed with 2 layers of tape, as if he'd meant to hide it from everyone. Maybe even from himself. Inside were my paintings. Not just the big ones, the ones that had hung at college exhibitions or in tiny cafes around Chicago, but the small sketches I'd made as a kid. My first charcoal drawings. A newspaper clipping from my first gallery show. Ticket stubs. A printed photo of me standing beside a mural I'd painted at 21. And beneath it all, a note in Dad's handwriting. She never stopped being mine. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that piece of paper, feeling something inside me unwind. Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, like a knot loosening after years of tension. He had watched. He had cared. Even when the lies stood between us, he still kept pieces of me close. A week later, I visited his grave. The cemetery was quiet, a soft Carolina breeze moving through the trees like a sigh. I cleaned the leaves from his headstone, brushed off the dust, and sat down beside him as if he were simply resting after a long shift. "I'll do this right, Dad," I said softly. "Not for the money, not to win, but because the truth deserves better than what he did to us." A bird landed on a branch above me, chirping once. A small, simple sound. I don't believe in signs, but I let myself imagine he heard me. As for Dylan, I don't know where he is. People say he left Asheville, that he drifted west, that he's in Arizona now doing odd jobs, trying to outrun a reputation he built with his own hands. I don't hate him. Hatred is a chain, and I've spent enough of my life being tied to his lies. What I feel is something quieter, a kind of mourning for the brother he could have been, the one I kept hoping existed beneath the manipulation. Maybe one day he'll realize what he lost. A father who loved him, a family that trusted him, a sister who tried. But that's his journey, not mine. Mine is here rebuilding, designing, creating. Not just buildings or business plans, but a life honest enough to stand on its own foundation. And every morning, when I walk into the office or stand in front of a blank canvas, I remember one thing. Truth comes late sometimes. It limps, stumbles, gets buried under lies and whispered rumors. But it always arrives. Always. And when it does, quietly, steadily, with no need for applause, it puts everything back where it belongs. Even people. Even me.